All right, so we're back. A couple of things I want to tell you. We sort of went through that whole first part of how you would approach a meeting with an individual. One of the things is when you're thinking about your napkin, especially those of you that are very neat and very organized and very like things in order, your napkin may look pretty on the front end, but it's going to look more like this when you get done with the person. And maybe even as you were following along with this, you might say, well, man, I wish he wrote it a lot clearer, or I wish it actually looked better or neater. Well, that's fine. If you're naturally neat, your writing's going to be better than mine. But what I want you to see is we're not worried so much about how neat it ends up, but what I want you to see is this should look like a mess when you're done. You don't have to do that on purpose. Whoa, it just actually will look like a mess. And so what I'm going to do, even though that's the way it ends up, we're going to go back just really quickly so we can review the whole thing in your mind, hit the high spots so that you understand what the purpose of this first idea, this concept, this picture that we're using is. So I'm going to get rid of this first thing. I'm not going to erase it yet. But I want you to go back. If you remember when we started, we had 4 circles. And those 4 circles actually had 4 titles. We had coping, or we had cope, we had event. We actually had the whole idea of what you feel about yourself at your worst, what you feel about yourself at your best. And so that was how we began. So I want to start back there again just very quickly and run through this with you. Now remember, I put down what a desired impression, what I would like for people to think about me at my best. And then I actually put down what I either feel about myself at my worst or what I actually do about myself at my worst. I'm not going to refill those in right now. And then we begin to say that the thing on the right, which is my best or my desired impression, is a success suit. I don't want anybody to discover what I feel or what I do at my best. So I'm going to put on that success suit every morning. I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to present that image. Now our point is that we have events in life, and I'm going to point to it right now. We have events in life that when those events happen, they undress me. Now let me put something in here on the diagram. If you remember, we actually said there was a filter there. Now, one of the things that I want to talk to you about that filter, not for the purpose of you talking to the person. If you remember, I said that I actually believe that filter was evil. But remember, we said we were talking about this in terms of a person that doesn't either buy that there's a God or isn't a Christ follower or who maybe even doesn't buy spirituality at all. If I were talking to a believer, instead of evil, I would just put Satan there. This filter, we believe because of what we read in the scriptures that this filter is put there by Satan, and he's out to steal, kill, and destroy my joy in this life. Christ intended that people would live abundantly. Well, frankly, I'm not going to have that dialogue with a person that doesn't buy God, because they're going, why are you even saying that to me? And so, but we have a filter, and so this is the way the filter works. If I can just look at this diagram. So an event happens, and it goes through the filter, and it gets distorted. But what it does is make me feel or sort of pings or triggers some of the things that I feel about myself at my worst. Now, I don't want to feel like that because that's very unacceptable. Feel that way. I feel rejected. And so what happens is I get angry, and I'm just going to put a big A there now. I get angry, and it puts pressure in my life. And so when the pressure's there, I have pain because I don't like feeling that way, and I'm not having any pleasure anymore. So what I do is I try to find some way to cope, and all I mean by coping is that I want to get rid of the pain and get some pleasure. Just as a side note, there's this fellow named Anthony Robbins or Tony Robbins. He's a positive thinking guru, and here's what he says. He says that if you could start a business that gets rid of the pain and gets some pleasure for a person, it makes them feel good, that you could make $1 million if they could feel loved and accepted and get rid of the pain in their life. Well, that's all I'm saying is what we do when we go to cope. Again, some things are very socially acceptable that we do to cope. Some things are very socially unacceptable, and it doesn't even matter which one they are. One of them I might go to jail for, and the other one I wouldn't. but it's what I do to get rid of the pain. But this is very important. I'm having to get rid of the pain because an event happened that went through this little filter that at that moment made me feel what I feel about myself at my worst. And I got angry, and I had to find some way to survive. It would be another word we put there. But then one of the things I pointed out is whatever I do right here to cope, to get rid of the pain, later on, I actually, if I have any kind of conscience at all, I start feeling badly about the way I operated, or it doesn't work, or there's consequences the way that I operated. Maybe everybody gets mad at me because of the way that I coped. And so then when that happens, it just confirms what I feel about myself at my worst. I'm a no-hoper. So now I want to give you one last quick example of how this works, again, in my life. And so I'm going to write it down and then hold it up for you to see. There was a time when my wife came in one day. I came in one day, and my wife had been shopping all day long. And she had gone out and gotten these cute little rugs for our mudroom. And on the rug, there were these cute little ducks following behind a big duck. And it was beautiful and white. Well, you know, I'm a good Southern boy. And when I grew up, when you come in the house, you always wipe your feet on the rug. So my wife had been shopping. It was a Saturday. It was a little rainy outside. And so she came up. I came into the mudroom. And what ended up happening was I wiped my feet on her cute little rug that she had just bought. So I wiped my feet on the rug. That was the event. So when I wiped my feet on the rug, my wife came around the corner from out of the kitchen, and she saw that I wiped my feet on the rug. And this is what she said to me. Have you lost your mind? Can't you see that you have completely destroyed my rug? Well, I didn't know that she'd been shopping all day for one rug. And so I'm wondering why she's so angry, but she's yelling at me, she's screaming at me, and she's saying, have I lost my mind? I don't care about her. If I cared about her more, then I wouldn't have wiped my feet on the rug. And so I didn't say one word. But I'm telling you, I was there, and when my wife asked me, did I lose my mind, I felt like a complete failure inside myself. So I was feeling out like I felt at my worst. And this is what I felt. You see, any good Southern boy learns when he's growing up that the one thing you're always responsible for is that your wife is never unhappy. Now, I know that's ridiculous, but I actually felt that. I felt like a failure as a husband because I'd somehow made my wife unhappy. Now, if you say I'm just an idiot, fine, I'm an idiot. I get that, but I felt like a failure, and I was completely angry. Now, what I did when that happened was I went around the house, and I'm just thinking, I haven't said a word to her, but I immediately went around the house, and I started looking around the house, and I came up to her and presented myself to her. So if I was writing this in a diagram for the person I was working with, I would do it just like this. I would say I looked around the house, and then I came back to my wife, and this is what I said. I don't know why you're worried about a little mud on the rug when your whole house is a pigsty. Well, as you can well imagine, that didn't go that well for me, because now she's really angry at me because I told her she's a bad housekeeper. And at the moment, though, it worked to get rid of my pain and get me some pleasure, because she's not talking to me anymore. I don't have to listen to her to be mad at me. And I feel like I've got back control because now I'm feeling like I'm right. But you know what? Soon after that, I actually started thinking about what I said, and I realized I made my wife more angry. And so the very thing I did to feel better actually just proved that I was a complete failure as a husband. And then I got really angry, and I did a bunch of other things and a lot of other things along the way. And I just went into this downward spiral, not the least of which I went out and I got in my new sports car that I just bought, and I drove 148 miles an hour out by the lake. Well, I don't know how to drive 148 miles an hour, so here's what I did. After I got going 148 miles an hour, I realized that I didn't know how to do that, and I slammed on the brakes, and the car went into a tailspin. And as it went into the tailspin, I finally stopped, somehow not killing myself, and I felt a very warm feeling. And you know what it was? I was so scared I wet my pants. I wet my pants. So can you see how that the very thing that I did by driving the car fast now just proves that I'm a no-hoper, that I can't even control my own bodily functions? And I was feeling like a complete stupid idiot that was a horrible husband. Now, the thing that I would point out, if I was talking to a guy that had that story happen to them, I'd point out to him is, I don't care what you did to cope. Now, your wife probably cares, but that's not even the point. And if you're ever talking with someone that's married, that we have a tendency to blame our mate for us being angry. You say, well, she did come in and scream, and that was unreasonable. Well, maybe so, maybe not. But even if what she said was completely mean and she was trying to get me mad, if I didn't feel like a failure as a husband, I'd never react to them. So the real problem here is what I feel about myself at my worst. And so again, what I point out to a person is this. I might just write the word identity right here at the top. Because what's happened is I now am having what I feel about me, my view of me, my value, my internal sense of me is actually impacting my person, my behavior, my reaction. So the truth is I'm not angry because my wife was mean to me that day. If you remember in my first example, my wife was actually just trying to help me out. I'm angry because I got undressed. And here's the truth. Even if I am married to the most wicked person on the planet, it's important that I understand that person doesn't have to control me at all. The only reason they get any rise out of me is because of what I feel about myself at my worst. What is my actual functional identity? My view of me. It doesn't matter what you think about me. It matters what I view about me. And so I want you to understand how that works. And the last thing before we leave this and go on to our next idea would be this. What we want to end up as far as an end game with this first idea is to explain to them, we're not going to argue with people about this person they're dealing with is or is not difficult to deal with. We're not trying to fix every one of their problems. We're just trying to help them understand why they're having so much trouble coping with what's going on and why they get into this rut that goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. It's the only purpose. So I want to make a transition now and talk to you about where do we want to go next with the individual to have them begin to understand what Christ has to offer them. But we're not going to be talking a whole lot about Christ on the front end. It's going to be on the back end of this discussion. So I'm going to put this down now and erase it, and we're going to take a look at another diagram, another idea that we're discussing. So let's just go ahead and erase all this. And we're going to draw a different diagram. Now, I want you to get out another piece of paper or another napkin if you actually have one. And what we're going to do is to draw a guy that looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy. And I'm a horrible artist, but that's as good as it's going to get. Now, when you draw that little guy, right about the middle of him, I want you to draw a circle. And then up where his head would be, I want you to draw something that looks a little like a brain. All right, so you got that? Now, the reason we're going to do this, everything else we're going to talk about for the next little bit is going to be illustrating these particular principles based on this. Now, I want to ask a question. I wonder who told me what I feel about myself at my worst. Or I wonder who told me that I needed to keep up this image of what I am at my best. I wonder where all that came from. Well, we noted before when we talked about this, if we could get some other kind of identity, I wouldn't be controlled by it anymore. But I wonder where I got all this mess. Well, that's what I want to talk to you about next, is what you would say to them. I want to talk to you about where you got these kinds of messages, because that isn't my perception of you at all. I'm shocked that you would actually at your worst moment feel that about yourself. Now, if there's some of that you're not shocked about, obviously don't lie to them and say that you're shocked about it. So I want to describe to you or show you where we get those kinds of ideas about ourselves in our head. Because generally we like to feel good about ourselves. We like to feel loved and accepted. But every person I know has these things that makes them end up feeling that way. So I have my little diagram here, my little guy, and I'm going to start explaining to them. Well, every person has what I would call, I'm going to use the word spirit. If you want to just call it an inner you, I don't care what you call it, but every person has a very innermost part of themselves. It just is. I refer to it as a spirit. Every person has what I would call a soul, and I'm going to talk to you about that. And every person obviously has a body. Now, I just want you to remember and recognize that I believe that by design, who we are on the inside is supposed to control this spirit that I'm talking about. It's supposed to control my soul, which controls my body. Now, I want to talk to you about all three of those things, but the main thing I want you to remember about your spirit, and I'm not going to write this all out right now, except just an abbreviation, that's where my intuition, my sense of what things ought to be done, that's where that resides. It's not just something you think. It's sometimes you say you have your gut feeling that something's going to happen. I'm saying that's that inner part of you. Your what I would call your conscience, I'm just going to put it C-O-N, your conscience is. And then I'm going to tell you there's this other part of you that has, and I'm just going to let it be a heart. It's this part in you that desperately wants to experience feeling loved and feeling accepted. And that's your spirit. That's all on the inside. And I'm going to tell you that your spirit, I believe, was designed to control what you think, feel, and decide, which is your soul. And so recognizing that to be true, think of it like this. I'm just going to do 3 little marks out here. In my brain, as we're picturing it, or in my soul, another way to look at this is your personality, just the way God lined you out. There are some people who are thinkers, and I'm just going to write that up here. There are some people that are more feelers, and there are some people that are more doers. And very quickly, I would say thinkers are people that are more analytical. They like organization. They like getting things done. Feelers are people that are more, you can see it. They get more emotional about things, and they love relationships, and they'll leave a job undone to actually care for or to respond to a person that is in a relationship with. And doers are kind of the guys who are shakers and movers, and they get things done. We're not saying that one of those is better than the other. We're just saying that every person is some mix of those things. Now, let me explain to you what ends up happening. And by the way, you might tell the person, if you want to, they can go on the website for Abiding Life Ministries and actually take the test. But right now, we're just trying to have a discussion with them, trying to answer one question. Why is it that I would end up thinking about those things in that circle of what I feel about myself at my worst? And so I'm going to show you in just a very quick way, and then I'm going to put my history, just like you would put their history or their life story, on this piece of paper. And then we're going to answer the question about how Jesus Christ can fix that, how he can answer that question. So your diagram so far ought to look like this. You have the little guy, you have the brain in his head, and you have the spirit on the inside. And the spirit is just where your conscience is. It's where you have an intuition about what's going to happen. But it's also the place there's something in you that just wants love and acceptance. It's in the very core of who you are. And you say, well, Tim, but I can feel love and I can feel acceptance. Yes, that's true. You don't have to buy, and this is what I tell them, you don't have to buy what I'm saying. I'm just telling you that I believe that's way deeper than just my emotions or what I feel or what I can logically understand. And so I have my spirit, and then I have my soul, which is my thinker, my feeler, and my doer, and whatever mix of that I am. Excuse me. And then I have my body. So that's where your diagram ought to be so far. Now, the next thing that's going to happen, though, is this. I want you to understand that I believe that there's an evil source in the world. You can buy it or not buy it, but there's an evil source in the world. And I think that evil source combines a lot of things to try to completely destroy my life. And so that evil source, I picture it as a bit of a triangle when I write it, but I have this evil source in my life, and it has to do with my failure, and then the evil source itself, And then, of course, what I would call this world. And this world is a series of events and people that come into my life. Now, let me show you how this works. And so your diagram ought to look a little something like this if you're following along with me. And so I'm telling you that if I'm right about this, that this evil source comes into my life, and the first thing it has to do is I experience life from the day I'm born. I have a lot of input that this world gives me, events and people. And those inputs happen, and it sends messages through what we call the unique self or your soul. Every person experiences life differently. So for instance, I can have two people that grow up in the same household, two twins that grow up in the same household. And one person think it's the best household on the planet because everybody's touchy, feely, huggy, which would be a feeler. And other individuals that are thinkers and are going, I hate this household because all they want to do is touch on you and hug on you and that kind of thing like that. One really likes it, the other one doesn't. And so I have this world, events and people. They experience life through their unique self, their soul. And sometimes they get negative messages, and sometimes they get positive messages. And so what I'll do is just draw that little evil triangle there that I had. And I draw a little arrow going right to their brain, which is their soul. And they experience that in a particular way. Now, sometimes I get negative messages that are sent through, and I end up feeling certain things about myself. Not everything that happens makes me feel that way. But I end up feeling things like that, and sometimes I feel stupid. Sometimes I feel like a no-hoper. Sometimes I feel like a failure. And so I'll just write those kinds of things on the page. Well, nobody likes feeling that way, and if I'm right that your spirit, the internal part of you, wants to experience love and acceptance, I'm not going to stand for feeling that way. So here's what I set out to do. I set out to change what I'm doing on the outside so I can feel better on the inside. And I'm going to give some examples of this in a minute. So the whole goal is to change how I feel. And so I do things. And so maybe what I do is I become an exercise guy and I work out so I can look really buff. Some people just try to escape, so they just kind of close into themselves and they just literally hide out from the world. Well, whatever, I might put 2 or 3 things that people try to do to change so they don't have to feel like what they're doing. Some people look to other people, like they might get a girlfriend or a guy friend, and everything about them is about that person. Well, that's fine, but I have a theory. You don't have to accept my theory, but I don't think you can do anything on the outside to fix what the inside feels. And so I would say that fails, and I can give you many examples of that. And when it fails, I don't like how that feels, so now I have to find some way to cope with that. And remember, I said we do things to cope. We do things that gets rid of my pain and gets me some pleasure. And so in my life, one of those things I did is I learned how to play the guitar, went into music, and tried to become famous. That's one of the things I did. Another thing I would do is eat. There's a lot of other things that people do. Along the way, sometimes if you're talking to guys, they'll actually do porn even after they're married. And the reason they'll do that is at least I've got some woman smiling at me, telling me how wonderful I am, but it's all in my head. Whatever the things I go do, some people get lost in TV, some people try to become super rich. I don't even care what it is. But I try to do those things to cope with the fact that I'm feeling like what I am over here when I was talking about my feelings. And I believe that fails, and watch what happens. And then I'll just draw a line right to the inside. It starts to form inside me an identity. And so what I'll do, you see, here I am. I said, I'm trying to feel. I feel like a certain way. I try to change it. It fails. When it fails, I try to cope, find some way to feel better on the outside. But that fails, and I still have these same feelings that are over here. And it ends up sticking inside my spirit, and it starts to give a definition of who I am. Now, do you remember when we were over here and we said what you feel about yourself at your worst? Not every negative thing that is ever said to you sticks, but some of it does. And it's because of events and people that are brought into your life, and you end up feeling this stuff. And we're going to give some examples of that as we move along. And so if you want to know where this circle came from, it ended up happening through this circle that happens right here. So again, we have this evil source using events and people that goes to my mind, it goes through my unique self, and frankly, an event that might hurt you wouldn't hurt me at all, because that's my unique self, my thinker, my feeler, my doer. If you reject me in a relationship, it's going to really hurt me a lot. I'm going to end up feeling a certain way. I'm going to try to fix that by changing. If that fails, I've got to find some way to cope. And so it ends up sending a message to the very core of who I am. And so that ends up being a problem because it starts to define who I am on the inside. I'm not saying you're broken or weird. Well, maybe you are broken. You may or may not be. I'm not saying you're unique. I'm saying this happens to every person on the planet, whether they're a God follower or not a God follower. This is what happens in life. But the big question we're going to address in the next part of this is this. How is it that could get fixed? Because the truth is I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in this rut for the rest of my life. Somehow, if I could figure out some way to get rid of what I feel about myself at my worst, or if I could get rid of and deal with the fact that I'm always having to keep my best face forward, keep this image up, what I feel about myself at my best, if I could do away with all that and could somehow become something totally different that was fully acceptable and I felt completely loved and accepted, it wouldn't matter what people did to me anymore. I'm not actually just in this chained to other people's thoughts and behaviors, and I actually do away with this rut that's in my life. So in the next part, we're going to talk about very specifically what Christ does to fix this problem. Now, there's one last thing I want to speak to you now purely from a tutorial standpoint. Some of you might be saying, well, hey, Tim, you haven't talked about the Bible at all yet. You haven't been quoting scriptures yet. I wanted to back you up for just a second and tell you this, that these principles that we're talking about are straight out of Scripture. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Now, I wouldn't be saying this to a person that isn't a Christ follower at this point. Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2 very simply says this. It says that he says, don't be conformed any longer to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. And he goes on to talk about how Christ does that. What you're looking at when I say an event goes through the filter and undresses you to make you feel about what you feel at your worst, and then you get angry and you find some way to cope, and then you feel bad about what you did to cope, the word for pattern there could easily be replaced with the idea rut, like a rut in the road. And you end up in it, and you guys know this. It gets harder and harder to get out of these ruts that happen in your life. What I'm going to show you is what Christ does to fix that the real problem, which is what you feel about yourself at your worst. And so that's the next part that we're going to talk about. Again, I want to remind you, I'm not saying that to a person that isn't a God follower, but I am saying that to you so that you understand we're not just picking this out of the air. Thank you.